Hi, everybody, and welcome. I am so happy to be here today with Keya Neal. I'm sitting across from Keya in virtual space here, and we had a little discussion last week to kick off this interview, and I want to briefly introduce Keya so that we can spend a lot of time talking. Keya is leading a revolution to break textural boundaries in our industry. She has an education series. It's called Texture versus Race, which she debuted at the American Board of Certified Hair Colorists in 2018. And that launched under her brand, which is called Kolour Kulture, which is also an education inspiration platform. And we'll talk more about that as well. And Keya was the keynote at the ABCH conference in 2019. This Sunday, she is going to be part of Fabric of Change, which is a day of free education. It's sponsored by Pivot Point, hosted by Sam Villa, Tippy Shorter, and it's a fundraiser for the National Black Justice Coalition. And Keya, because we call this podcast Choose Beauty, I really want to hear about your beauty beginnings and how you came to choose beauty as a career. What was that like for you? Tell us a little bit.
First of all, and for having me. I'm super excited to be here. Have been a huge Modern Salon fan for a while, so I'm just really honored to be here on this platform and discuss everything that's going on with me in Texture versus Race. But to answer your question, I don't think I chose beauty as much as beauty chose me. And the reason why I say that is because I grew up watching my mother being one of the most glamorous women that I knew, but I was the complete polar opposite. Like, people just didn't believe that I was her child, at the time. And I actually went to college for journalism for 2 years. And being bored, I just, I said, I don't know if I want to go back. And a friend of mine just said, well, you should do hair. You like to do it. And I'm like, no, actually, I don't. And she's like, yeah, you do a great job. You should do it. And so after a while, I was like, well, I don't have anything else to do. And I know that sounds a little cliche, like I just did it, but when I went, I realized how much I really loved it and how much I really had it inside of me. I didn't think I had an innate, skill for hair, but I do feel like I cultivated it when I got there, because I was very behind people that did it naturally and had the doll babies and they cut hair and styled it all day. I didn't do that. So I had to work a little bit harder, but I think once I started to cultivate that skill, I realized it was there, and it just kind of went from there, just blew up from there.
Actually, I think it's really inspiring to hear about somebody who sort of discovered the love for beauty, even though you didn't necessarily know it was there.
I didn't. I just never leaned into that. I guess I watched it with my mom so long. It was just a thing. It wasn't necessarily something that triggered at the time. It wasn't until I actually got into cosmetology school. And even though I was behind, like I said, I was not good. I actually sucked. I really did suck at doing hair at first, but I was smart and I really loved the chemistry of it all. And I loved learning. I loved the theory part of it. And so that sort of kept me motivated to stay in school and stick with it. And eventually, working a little harder, staying over, getting in earlier, running through a lot more mannequins than I was supposed to, I actually cultivated that skill. And I feel like that's when the light bulb just went off. So I would encourage anybody to not feel like they can't learn something. You can learn anything with commitment.
I love that you touched on the chemistry too, because, hair colorists are this amazing blend of sort of left brain, right brain, so creative, but there is so much calculation and precision in hair color, which I find very intimidating. And you specialize in color, and specifically coloring textured hair, educating on that. Talk about how you kind of came to that specialization.
So it's funny that you said that. I read your question initially and I thought, but I don't specialize in coloring textured hair. That came again after the fact. Really, I was just simply a colorist, but in my own way. I was only as good as the texture that I performed it on. Okay, so I had a traditional Black salon that I owned in South Carolina. So most of my clients did have textured hair. But when I relocated to Maryland, I got married and I moved, it was a great opportunity for me to hit a reset button and to kind of start over. And that's when I started really wanting to learn more about working with different fabrics. So when I started, I immediately went into a salon. My first salon was a multicultural salon, and that was very intentional because I wanted to learn to do all fabrics. I wanted to learn how to do quote unquote white people hair, and I wanted to learn how to be more diverse and to expand that whole my clientele base. I wanted to be able to do all fabrics of hair, but I didn't know at the time. But so learning how to do more hair, I didn't necessarily specialize in just textured hair. I was just good at it because that's what I was exposed to. And so once I was exposed to more, than I was good at that. And that's how Kolour Kulture became to be, because I started to see some of the holes and the lack in the education, because I thought that African-American people didn't get the same education per se. And I felt like there was so much that we were not privy to, so much education. And I wanted to bridge that gap. So I kind of developed a curriculum called Color Interpretations, which was it was sort of my way of delivering the color information, the curriculum, in a way that everyone could understand. Especially not because I geared to have a Black audience and only serve the Black community, but they did get the best of me. It did serve them well, because there's not a lot of education out there that breaks it down to a point where everybody can understand it from the beginning and is inclusive of all texture. So texture versus race came after the fact, but Kolour Kulture was really me saying, let me teach color from a perspective that's inclusive of all education itself. And I knew I was onto something, because my audience was very diverse. When I went to all the shows, the bigger shows, and had classes with Premier or IBS and ISSE, half of the audience would be Caucasian. I mean, like, it would just be split. And people all enjoyed the curriculum equally, because they had never heard it. They had never heard the information that way. They had never heard it broken down to such layman terms that they could actually understand it. And that was sort of, revelatory for me as well.
And that really feeds into the next question, because you're sort of answering it. I as an entrepreneur, you have to sort of see a need and then think, how do I hope to fill that need? So the need you saw was, as you said, the education that spoke to every type of hair and looking at hair as fabric.
Correct. That's what I had to do. I had to learn and sort of unlearn my way of doing things by adding in information about other textures. Of course, I was versed in textured hair, but I wanted to learn, well, what happens if the hair is straight? Well, what happens if the cuticles are, they have low porosity? Or what happens if the hair is a different level? It's already 5, 6, and 7. Like, what happens there? And in seeking that amount of education, it really opened me up to how people miss it. And one of the things I found so intriguing was that, and this is just, I'm always having a very candid, honest conversation. I hope your listeners are there for it and they understand. But what I thought was that all white people just knew how to do color, and that because they did color, everybody was so versed. And I realized that there's a lot of breakdown in the understanding of color in every culture, not just the African-American culture. There's breakdown everywhere. So I think the appreciation for the Color Interpretations curriculum was for everyone, because the information broke it down, and that was the need. We needed to understand all aspects of the color chemistry from very page 1, from the very first page 1 on up, not just diving into technique or diving into just doing things because it's popular, and just, we had to learn the chemistry of doing everything, and people just appreciated that. So once I realized that all white people just didn't know how to do color, it was very freeing for me as well.
You're a really strong advocate for diversity and inclusivity in beauty schools and in cosmetology curriculum. So we're kind of touching back, like you said, day one. What would be the first step that schools could do right now to improve in their curriculum?
Well, we got to understand where this breakdown starts from. It starts from school, because schools sort of breed a fear of doing all fabrics of hair. And I think that the schools need to reform their curriculums, and they need to make it mandatory and standard that everyone learns how to do all textures of hair, and every single segment of the curriculum should be inclusive of all fabrics, and not to make people think that textured hair lives on the same page as an elective with lashes or nails or extensions. I think if we standardize textured hair, then what we're doing is we're making more multifaceted people coming out of school, and not sort of perpetuating the segregation of the beauty industry, because that's what it does. If you cultivate fear, then you're just going to grow segregation. And I think that that's what the schools need to really take a hard look at, is what seeds are you producing? What fruit are you producing and putting into our industry?
We're going to take a quick pause for a commercial, and we'll be right back with Kea Neal. And we're back. And Kea, I want to talk a little bit about the Texture versus Race Summit, which you launched in 2018. And then the year following, at the American Board of Certified Hair Colorists, you were their keynote speaker. And you've scheduled Texture versus Race for the second half of 2020. Fingers crossed. I mean, I'm sure you'll pull that off. We just don't know what it'll look like yet. So is the discussion going to be different than it was last year? Or is this really the same discussion, but it's just more urgent and people's ears are a little bit more open?
I think it's both. I think we're going to see more eyes wide open, more ears willing to hear the message. I think we'll have more feet at the table. I believe the messaging is the same to an extent, but I think this year will be much more intentional, because we understand what those needs are, and because we have so much, so it's so much more open now. Like, everybody is ready, and now we understand a little bit more. And let me just say why I'm saying it that way. Texture versus Race 2019 was just our way of saying, can we just gather and have the conversation and do some education? But we really didn't know exactly how it was going to look. Like, everybody came without they didn't come with a lot of expectation, other than the fact that they wanted to be in the room where the energy was solid and circumventing around diversity and inclusion. And that's about all we knew. Right? We had education, but we just wanted to come together and say, you feel that way? You feel that way too? I do too. Is it, are we all just crazy? No, we want diversity and inclusion. What can we do now to really forward the movement? What can we do? So it was sort of a gathering, if you will. This year will be a lot more intentional about the specific areas that we need to really lean into. And the conversations will be the same, but I think we'll have much more impact this year because of how open people are now to hearing the message.
And I didn't ask you this earlier, but can you just talk about, because you did touch on it, just the response when you first, introduced it, because you didn't know what to expect, but what you told me is that it was really overwhelming.
It was, and because when I was asked to do the class, it was sort of propped up to be, teach us how to do textured hair. Teach a room full of white people how to do textured hair. And like I told you earlier, that wasn't really my thing. Color culture was about teaching people how to do all textures of hair. And I had not segmented at that point. I had not segmented textured hair as an appendage education. It was not an exception. It was not separate. It was inclusive of all. So I didn't really know how to do that. really a little taken aback. And I had to step back and say, now, what am I doing? Like, how do I teach that? How do I take this component and make it something separate and individual when I struggled so hard to put it all together? You see?
Yeah. Yeah.
So it was kind of something I struggled with actually doing. And it took me some time to actually get it together. And I prayed about it. I prayed long and hard, and I asked God, how do I teach people how to do Black hair? I'm not sure if we're all going to lean into 1, 2, or 3 things that's just going to make all the difference. And I said, what people really need to learn is how to deal with each other. And I think the confirmation, God said, that's exactly what you're going to do. You can teach people how to do anything. You can teach them how to do hair, but can you teach them how to do each other? Can you teach them how to handle the hair that sits in the chair, no matter what package is showing up in? And that is how I started the conversation for each of those classes. But again, I'm at an organizational conference where 90% or more are all white people staring at me like, well, what are you going to do? What are you going to say? And I was nervous. I was very nervous about doing that class. I didn't know how it was going to be received, and we didn't know what the backlash would be. But, kudos to the American Board of Certified Hair Colorists for even realizing that their organization was just way too white. And there's hardly any diversity there at a time. And they said we wanted to change that. So kudos to them for knowing that texture versus race needed to be a part of their organization and a part of their DNA before it was really kind of popular. And they took a chance on that. They took a chance and said, have your class. We don't even know what you're going to teach. We just trust you, and you do it. And they gave me those classes, and the response was overwhelming. Like, people were so receptive, and people were so, open. Like, it had opened up something inside of them. And we did a lot of crying that weekend. Like, not a lot of talking per se with even the students, like afterwards or in the hall. I was met with a lot of tears. Can I just hug you? I just appreciate you saying something. I've always known that I wanted to do more, and I should be. I don't feel good about my culture of the salon, or I don't feel good about not being able to do everybody, but thank you for creating this space where we could learn, where we could talk, where we could have honest conversations and hard conversations around why we're so separate, and then begin to sort of dismantle that whole segregation part. How do we dismantle that? How do we take that wall down brick by brick? And so that was a little overwhelming for me because I didn't expect that, but I was happy.
And well, you should have been, absolutely. You talked about salon culture and sort of going back to what is wrong in the foundation, maybe, that is making things rocky. And you told me something last week that was so eye-opening. You talked about how the sort of system of salons getting points towards education when they buy into product or retail, that wasn't something that maybe you knew about or other Black artists would have been able to tap into because they didn't even really understand that system. And that maybe goes back to the fact that there was already a disconnect between sort of the team-based salons and the booth rent salons. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because I think that's some education we need to understand. Maybe, if we're working so hard to blur these lines, we need to understand where they start, where the lines start sometimes.
And that was kind of a part where when we were talking and I was giving you examples of how, the separation in the cultures, the differences in the cultures, how they stand. And I was telling you that when I started working with this multicultural salon, that I had no idea that education was available to me based on my purchasing power. And I had never experienced that until I started working in the salon. I was like, I don't think we know that. And you were like, really? And I'm like, no, Black people, I don't think a lot of Black people, traditional classic salons know that. And I don't know it's because they don't have team-based, I'm not going to say that. I'll just say it's the way we receive education and where we buy products from. So because we buy products from manufacturers that are Black, because of course there's a segregation in the manufacturers. You have your Black products and you got your white products. So it wasn't until sort of recently, you know, maybe in the past 5 to 7, 8 years maybe, where people started to entertain the idea that one product could work on multiple textures. Like that's become a thing in the past 5 or 6 years or so. But before that, historically, Black people buy from Black products that are made for Black hair, and white people the same. So the way you systematically have it set up, where if you buy from a Cosmoprof or whatever your distribution house is, whether it's True Beauty or, you know, Twin States, or, you know, those are the ones that are local here, Beauty Scope, whatever, they have structure in place that says if you buy everything from us, even if it's different brands, because they're all being housed, if you buy from us and you show a loyalty, we'll send education from each of the brands, where we buy brand specific. So I don't have, or as a traditional Black salon, I don't have a distribution house that just has a whole lot of products that I can just keep switching out, saying, oh, this retail line didn't work for me, so you take this back and bring something else. Like that was a new concept for me. Like we bought it, we liked it, or we didn't, we bought something else. So no, we didn't know that you could get all this in salon education, and we didn't know that if we bought everything from one space that we could. We didn't know that. I know we didn't. I know there's a lot of people that still don't quite know that. But because a lot of those products that we do use are now coming into like the Cosmoprops and the Salon Centrics, then maybe we're getting more privy to that information. But historically, that wasn't something that we was necessarily privy to. And I'm not really sure that, I think sometimes the team space, you know, that would have probably been something for us to know. But you got to think about the distribution as well. We're used to door-to-door concept where, you know, distributors come in and they actually have the product and bring it. So therefore, we're not necessarily working towards, we're not going out and buying them. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We're, you know, someone bringing product to us. And that was new to me when I saw our distributor come in and go, no, you have to wait a week and we're going to take the order and then we'll send it to you. All of that was new. But I think if someone would come to our salon and say, hey, let me introduce myself. Here's the products that I have. You know, if you know, I want to bring salon education to your platform. I mean, not your platform, but to your salon. I think that more Black people would have been privy to it, but nobody came to the door and said anything. If we didn't come to you, we wouldn't know.
And education, as you talked about earlier, education sort of removes fear too, that if education is available, and you're a prime example of that, you know, you're stepping out and offering to educate and finding that, you know, everybody across the board is benefiting because it's helping. It's a move towards removing that barrier. You know, there's so many things we could talk about, but you mentioned when you moved to Maryland, you sort of hit a reset. And I think we talk a lot right now about maybe we have an opportunity to hit reset, or maybe we don't need to reset. Maybe we need to reimagine, reinvent. I don't know what it is, but there is a social awakening, and we don't want to miss that opportunity and let it go by us. So what would you want somebody listening to this podcast to really take away and then maybe take action on?
I think you're right. I think at this point, there is a huge shift in the industry right now. It's undeniable. It's nothing we can overlook. Everyone is being charged with getting in behind this shift. Everyone. And I think where we can start is just understanding where we are in the industry, where we have failed in the industry, where we have allowed the industry to operate this way in open segregation. We've allowed that. And we need to now all stand up for that and see where we can get in and where we can make positive change, which is starting back with the schools, educating our teachers, you know, because even if you put texture education into the curriculum, you still got to have someone that's well educated enough to teach it. You need to add it back into the testing, because that's what's happened. We've had efforts to put texture education, but if you don't make it mandatory, then the school doesn't have to teach it. So we've got reform to do in the school on a lot of different levels. I think in the salons, we need to start revisiting our cultures, seeing whether or not we're making it open for Black stylists to want to work in multicultural salons, whether white stylists want to go work into multicultural salons, right? You know, we have to create cultures where everybody is welcome to work and to patronize. That goes with education and educating all of the stylists and being able to do multiple textures. And I'm not talking about just all white people learning how to do texture. I'm talking about Black people learning how to do straighter textures as well. Like that's we need to start cross-pollinating, and we need to create a space where everyone can do everyone regardless of the body that it shows up in, regardless of the skin. We need to be able to deal with every texture at hand. I think the manufacturers play a part in this. I think they should step up with their representation, with their diversity and inclusiveness, and how the narrative that they spill about textured hair. I think we should normalize texture. I believe that we need to call all textures beautiful, every texture, whether it's straight, wavy, wavy, curly, or coily. I think all textures should be beautiful, and we need to learn to celebrate that. We need to debunk our standards of beauty and not make people feel like you know, if it doesn't look like this, then it's not beautiful. And we need to start, you know, sharing what can be beautiful in all sites if we just give it a chance. Like, we got to normalize texture. We got to see more different textures, not the ones you're comfortable with, not the ones with the big round ringlet curls, but now you're calling that texture. That's not the only texture that exists. We got to start leaning into more melanated women in our campaigns, in our education platforms. You got to have more Black educators. You have to, you know, white people need to know that Black educators have great education, and it's okay to go get education outside of what you know and who looks like you. Mm-hmm. Publications like yourself, you know, start highlighting and showcasing people that are not right on your radar because they work for these big manufacturers that are highly connected to you. Like, start looking somewhere else for that talent. It's there. It's hiding in plain sight. So I think there's a lot that every single one of us can do to help the movement.
Yeah. I'm so grateful. I'm grateful that you're just giving your time, energy, and effort to educating us, to sharing your talents with the industry. And in wrapping up, I just want to say thank you, Kea. Thank you for talking and for being there. And I look forward to seeing what you do on Sunday.
Absolutely. I'm super excited about it. So I will see everybody there. And thank you so much, Anne, for having me. Thank you, Modern Salon, for the opportunity to speak on your platform.
Thank you so much.